Okay, perfect. Um, then I will go ahead and get started, which is to say, hello, everybody. My name is Emma Rodwin. I am the Upper School Director of Education at Butler Montessori. Last year, I did a bunch of coffee and conversations because we were rolling out the curriculum for the Fairhaven High School program. Um, and this is a coffee and conversation that I've been wanting to do for a long time, but last year just there was no room in all the things that we were doing. So this year I made sure that we would definitely do this topic, which is about allowances and money management for primary age children, elementary age children, and adolescents as well. So I am super pleased to introduce Leah Nichaman. She is the president and founder and CEO, I guess, of Everyday Money Management. She also is a former PEP, Parent Encouragement Program educator, and has the distinction of being my mom. So it was really easy for me to go to her and say, "Hi, will you please do this event for us?" And well, she can't say no to me. So here we are doing this for all of you. And I will turn it over.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for showing up on a Wednesday night. I really appreciate it. And Emma kind of told you a bit about my background. I'll just add a little bit more. Um, I would say the thing that makes me the most expert about giving allowances is the fact that I did it with my kids. Emma has a younger sister, so there's two, and I learned a lot of lessons along the way. But in addition to that, I know a lot about personal finance these days because I run this company called Everyday Money Management, where we really mostly serve older folks, senior citizens, people usually in their 80s. But we have served some young adults, and I can see so clearly how at all stages of life, what people learned when they were kids about money probably has affected sort of how they've managed money along the way. So with that, we're going to just jump in. Feel free to unmute and interject with questions. I think that will work the best. I don't mind if we do that. I only have 12 slides, so I'm kind of hoping that we'll get through everything that I wanted to tell you. Let's see. Come on, there we go. So the first thing is the sad truth is that about 50% of US adults are not really financially literate. This is studied year after year. It stayed pretty steady at 50%. A couple years ago, an organization, Goal Setter, did a study where they gave a quiz to I think a little over 1,000 students at really top 10 universities, like Ivy Leagues. And they found the same thing. People got it. They got about 50% of the questions right. And another little stat that I found that it was so interesting is that the average 21-year-old in the US will spend more than 3.3 million, meaning in their lifetime. So a lot of money is going to run through people's hands over the course of their entire life. And I can tell you a lot of that spending actually happens late in life. This is what everybody is saving for. But the fact that they are going to have to essentially manage their income and the spending of all of that much money really makes us understand how incredibly important it is for them to know how to manage their money well. So in case you're interested in the little quiz that I think the students at the Ivy Leagues took, I took it this morning just to see. I did really well. I only missed 1 out of 15. But I think if I wasn't doing the work that I do, I might have missed more. So if you're just sort of curious to see, it's just 15 questions and, see how you do. And maybe you can find some areas where, the things that if you miss them, the things that you missed, you can Google them so easily. And there's lots and lots of great information on the internet that, to teach you about these financial concepts. For example, Investopedia is one. There's just a whole Forbes magazine. There's a whole lot of financial resource material out there. Okay, and before we get going on the actual topic of allowances, I will say that you already probably know that children are always watching us and they are really paying attention. And so, really having a good understanding of where you're coming from when it comes to money can be awfully helpful. Especially if you came from a financial background that's different from the one you're in now. Maybe you grew up in poverty, maybe you grew up exceedingly wealthy, maybe you're in a different place now in your current life, but those early experiences that we have really do affect what we think is important to teach our kids about. And so these bullet points are really just a little list. There could be hundreds and hundreds more ideas about money, but here's some that, over the years I've heard people talk about, especially in the parenting classes when we've talked about our money views. There's probably the spend and enjoy life guy. Okay, so why give an allowance? If you don't take away too many nuggets, this is one that you should take away. All allowances is a tool. It's just a tool that you can use to let kids practice with money. That's all it is. And so it's a very useful tool. But the way we participate in it will make a difference as to whether or not the tool is successful in teaching kids the important things that they need to learn. So what kinds of things would kids learn? They're going to learn, of course, about accepting responsibility, all the way from the smallest children, who all we're asking them to do with their allowance is be able to keep their money safe and know where it is, right? Little 4-year-olds or 6-year-olds may not be about spending a lot of money just yet, but just them getting some money and they have to have a safe place to put it. That's, so being responsible for your money, have appreciation for what they have. In other words, when people have skin in the game, if they've paid for something, they may appreciate it more. Sort of like, kids are more likely to eat food that they've helped prepare. Those kinds of things still also apply in the financial realm. It will absolutely teach them about decision making. I have this much money, should I buy this, etc. It definitely will teach them about delayed gratification, because when we talk about the amount of money that one might give their child, you don't want to give them so much that they can get anything they want, but you want to give them enough that they are able to buy various things and be able to make the mistakes that you need them to make with money now while the stakes are awfully low. It may teach them resourcefulness. They don't have enough money. Maybe you offer to pay them, or they get for jobs around the house that are not part of their regular chores. Or maybe they start to do odd jobs for neighbors and get paid, etc. And if they're old enough to actually go out and get a part-time job, maybe they do that, for those of you who have older children. I guarantee it helps with confidence. Some children do react to managing money with anxiety, but once they get over that, if you can help support them through that anxiety, they really do develop a sense of confidence that they're in control of their money and not the other way around. And I have encountered many an adult who lets their money sort of control them, and they aren't the ones who are really using their money intentionally, let's put it that way. It certainly promotes self-sufficiency. Even though you're the one giving them the money, what you're doing there is you're mimicking an income, if you will, for children until they actually do get an income. So it's helping them to understand, this money is mine and this is how I need to, what I'm going to be using it for, and be self-sufficient and not have to go back to the well and ask for more money. And then, of course, good money management principles, teaching them how to shop, be a good shopper, maybe teaching them how to use coupons, those kinds of things, teaching them about budgeting, teaching them about investing when they get a little bit older, if they're interested. So there's a ton of wonderful lessons that come from giving kids an allowance. Okay. I do want to say one thing before we get to sort of the, how we go about figuring out how much to give, etc., is that nowadays, so much of our spending is done digitally. But I do think with young children, the up to maybe age, I guess up until they would have a smartphone. So whatever age that is in your family, when the kid has a smartphone, then they'd be able to manage their money digitally. But until then, it's a lot harder. So I'm going to guess 10 to 12, maybe kids are getting smartphones nowadays. I don't know exactly what that age is now, but up until then, doing some of this spending and allowance giving in cash I still think is important, even though we know that cash will probably end up going away eventually, maybe not in our lifetimes, but certainly in our kids' lifetimes. So I think it's important to start, especially young children, with cash. Okay, so what's the allowance going to be based on? It's going to be based on, first of all, the child's age, and we're going to go through the age groups in the next few slides after this to talk about, what might be, reasonable and what the kid would be using the money for. It also will depend on the child's predisposition, meaning sort of their personality and perhaps their interest. Some kids are really interested in money. Some kids are spenders. Some kids are savers. They seem to have it genetically somehow. I'm not quite sure. But if you have more than one child, you know that they're different from each other. And we don't know exactly why that's the case. And even between Emma and her sister, I think Emma, you were more of the spender, and her sister was more of a saver, and her sister grew up to be an exceedingly frugal anti-capitalist child, as opposed to Emma, who's just regular, save and spend. So I think it's sort of interesting to see how even a child's general personality and maybe their level of anxiety around money may also influence, whether or not, how well they're going to take to allowance. And there was a point, I don't know if you remember this, Emma, where Emma didn't want to have her allowance anymore. I don't even remember what age it was, but she was like, it's too stressful for me to try to figure out what to do with this money, etc. And so we had to work through that. So even as children get older, maybe they're 13, 15, 17, they will still have money questions, anxieties about money, and certainly with those first jobs, kids come home with their pay stub and go, what is this? And there's lots of learning. And I think stress reduction that we parents can do with our kids. And to the extent that you're able to mimic, again, getting an income and spending it and saving it, investing it, etc., through the allowance process, everybody's already practicing these skills ahead of when the actual real first job happens. The third point is, of course, it's what the child needs and some of their wants. So as children get older, you really will start to, if you haven't already, been talking to them about what's a need and what's a want, right? And we're going to talk about giving enough money so that they get some of the wants, but not all of the wants. They're going to have to wait and save up for some of those. Of course, your family's resources, if you don't have enough money to give an allowance or a large allowance, let's say, or whatever you might think is appropriate, then don't do that. You're going to give as much as you can give, and you're going to, and if you have oodles of money, if you're a very wealthy person and you still don't want to give everything you possibly could give. So at the extremes, if a family doesn't have enough resources to give an allowance, then that will be a way to talk about our family's resources and maybe going out and getting a part-time job. It's sort of like the discussion that many families have around college. This is how much we've saved. And if you want to go to this school that costs, $20,000 more a year, you're going to have to go and get scholarships or get work study, or those kinds of conversations often happen about an entire family's resources around the time of college. But before that, you should be deciding how much of your money do you want to give for this learning that your children are going to get. And if your children have been treating you like an ATM already, then you're already spending money for their needs and wants. And, this is a way to get off of that that whole system where they ask for money and you have to decide every single time on the spot, should I give it or shouldn't I? This is a huge stress reliever, believe it or not, for parents, because there's a system. We've agreed to it. You're going to get your allowance once a week, and that will help as long as you're consistent about doing what you said you were going to do. The child also has to keep up their end of the bargain in terms of how much money they spend, and in many cases, what they're spending it on. So we'll talk about limit setting around that as well. And then, of course, your approach to money, what we talked about before. You have to, every family is different. There really aren't too many, correct and incorrect things to do. I can tell you things that will be helpful versus things that may make it harder. But in reality, you're the one who needs to decide, how much you're going to give, how you're going to give it, what happens if a child doesn't live up to their end of the bargain. All sorts of things will have to be decided by you or in the context of meetings with your child. All right, so how much to give, and what are you going to have them, let them or tell them they need to spend it on, right? So I already said each family is different. I don't know if any of you read Kiplinger's The Financial Magazine, but there was a writer there, Janet Bodnar. She wrote a bunch of books about money and kids. And she said, you want to give enough so your kids can squander it, but not so much that you will be upset when they do. So the purpose of giving the allowances is so they can make mistakes and learn. They can waste it. They can spend it on things that you don't really like, but you may and should set limits on absolutely on things that you will not allow them to spend on. So for example, a small child wants to spend their allowance on candy, and you have a tolerance for a certain amount of candy, but not excessive amounts of candy. So they have, $5 to spend, but you don't want to spend an entire $5 on candy. You might set a limit. You can only spend half of your spending money on things like candy. If you have a limit on, I don't know, clothing that's too revealing, you can spend it. I'm giving you money. You can spend it on clothing, whatever you want, but not things that we don't allow in our family. So there's definitely, and certainly nothing illegal, right? As the children get older, you really want to be obviously setting that limit as well. So I think it's really about knowing your own child and being able to talk with them about the things they like and, what this money could be used for. Now, when the kids are really little, many people don't start at age 3. You really only want to start once a child understands money. They understand what a dollar bill is, a $5 bill, a dime versus a quarter. Like, they really understand money. They may not understand its value in the marketplace yet, but even young kids, even 5 and 6-year-olds, do understand that when they go to the vending machine and they want to get, let's say, a water or a soda out of it, that they have to put $1.25 in. Used to be 50 cents, but oh well, so kids do start to engage in certain financial transactions maybe, and so they are starting to understand. At swim club in the summer is a really good time for kids to learn about exchanging money for what they want, because kids often are quite independent, going up to the snack bar at the pool and learning to hand over, $2 and getting an ice cream, right? So pools are great places, I think, where kids can sort of be independent and go and make purchases, as opposed to, being out there in retail stores and having to deal with, real cashiers and that kind of thing. So you can start quite young, especially if you have a child who's interested. But what's the money for? It's only going to be for what we call living and giving. And even then, you don't have to force giving. Many families do. In our family, we did. So kids who are really little have maybe 2 buckets. They have the bucket for living, meaning the things that what that means for a little kid is what they want to spend their money on, and then giving some away. Maybe they want to put some in the collection plate at church, or they want to give money for hurricane relief, right? So, and then they need to be taught to be responsible with their money, to have a place to put it. So you might, have them decorate a jar, or they have a purse, a little purse where they keep it, etc. Now, if a child has a purse or a bag or something, and they're going to take it with them shopping with you, let's say, it's a good idea to put their name inside and a phone number, so that if they lose it, right, maybe some nice Good Samaritan will call. But if they do lose it, that's a lesson right there. Please do not yell at your child if they lose their purse with all their money, because they will already be yelling at themselves about this, because it's their money and they lost it. So you don't need to add any more insult to their injury when they make, some of these money mistakes, if you will. So a very small child is just about hanging on to the money, knowing where it is, knowing where the purse is when it's time to go shopping, and then being able to count it out, hand it over, when the purchase is being made, that kind of thing. Okay. Ages 7 to 10, you're going to gradually increase that allowance, right? It will be 3 buckets: living, giving, and saving, right? And I don't remember, Emma, do you remember what the percentages were? The giving was 10%. And I think, I mean, the kids made up their own percentages for the saving and the giving, but I think it was like 60, 30, 10, something like that.
It was
60%.
mostly living and then some saving, and then
Yeah.
the small portion was giving, something
Yeah,
like.
exactly. And they had, boxes that they kept, little boxes that they kept it in. It could be jars, there's all sorts of, ways. Again, this is where give your child ownership over what they, where they store their money, and, you know, and give them some ownership in all those choices, and decorating their purses or their boxes or whatever. So this is where, though, you're really starting to talk to kids about what they need to spend their allowance on. And this is where we made some mistakes, because I remember very distinctly our kids being confused. And they would often say, well, am I supposed to use my allowance for this, or is this something that you're going to buy for me? So clearly we were not clear enough, right? So, and sometimes we couldn't anticipate every situation. So we couldn't say all the possible things in the world you could spend your money on. These are the things that are allowance, and these are the things that are us. So as a family, I think we kind of had to work it out as we went along, but just know that there may be some confusion when you encounter a new purchase, right? Where a child isn't quite sure if this is something she or he is supposed to spend, their allowance on. But for a kid who's in this, elementary school age, it could be school supplies. Maybe not the main stuff that you buy at the beginning of the year, but after that, any school supplies they want could be on them. It could include, if they have a gerbil or something, their gerbil food, right? I don't think y'all buy school lunches, right? So none of that. But, gifts at Christmas time or Hanukkah time or whatever, they want to give gifts. Maybe they either buy something they can afford, or they contribute to something that you help them buy, maybe for grandma or for their sibling, etc. So those are some examples of what you could put into the living category for your 7 to 10-year-olds. And then, again, help them to understand how they're going to give money. It could be that you're going to make a donation to the charity of their choice, right? Teach them how to choose charities, right? I think a 10-year-old can understand that, we go on to, let's say, Charity Navigator. We talk about causes, maybe it's hunger. And so we talk about local versus global. We may go on to Google and find some charities. Then maybe we go on Charity Navigator and show them that, some charities are better than others. And then maybe they give you the money that they have, and then you make the donation online if a child doesn't have any electronic way to make a payment, right? So there's lots and lots of learning that can happen around giving as well at this stage. And then saving, honestly, at this stage, it's really piggy bank. If your child has a bank account or you want to open a bank account for them, or you want to use one of the apps, later on in the presentation, there's a bunch of apps. One that I know one parent is already using is called Greenlight, which I have not used it. It seems like a great app where a kid gets a debit card and the money would be, could be, when they save it, it could be put there for them. Well, saving, I guess they wouldn't put it on the debit card. They put it in some sort of a savings vehicle. So again, this is where if your child doesn't have a bank account, they still don't need one at this age. I'd say in the next age bracket, a savings account or a checking account would be really helpful. But at this stage, it's not completely necessary. And just talk with your bank. Most banks nowadays have financial literacy programs. They have programs for children. And you may be able to get some sort of a custodial account, but where your child can actually make the transactions on it. So before we go on too much, I do want to talk a little bit more about the how much. That mostly I was talking about what are they going to use it for. So a rule of thumb that a lot of experts talk about is $1 a week for each year of life. Now, there's been no inflation in the rate at which children age, but there has been inflation in the marketplace. So it's very possible that $1 a week for each year of life may not be enough for what you all have determined with each child to be their needs and wants, some wants. But I will say that when I was researching the Greenlight app, there was a chart there. So if you go to the Greenlight app, you can see the chart that really showed that what parents are actually, who are using that app, are actually giving their children at different ages pretty much tracks with the $1 a week for each year of their age. Okay, so again, you want to give them enough so that they can do something with it. I want to buy a new basketball. A new basketball costs $14.99 at Target, maybe. That kid has to have access to $15 plus tax, right? You have to teach them about tax too as they start to spend their own money. So that is one way. So a 10-year-old's getting $10 a week. Again, in your family, if you've decided that's too much for my child, I don't think that they're going to be responsible with it actually is that's not a helpful way of thinking about it. You really want to try to have faith in your kids that they're going to be as responsible as they can. And if you lose $40 over the course of a month and your kid learned a lot in the process of you losing $40 because you gave it to them and they lost it, wasted it, gave it away to their friend, etc., that's okay. That to me is a really good exchange for the $40, the lesson. So how you handle with your child and how you support them through their money mistakes is the key to the whole thing. Okay, because the idea of allowance is for them to make mistakes. You want them to make mistakes at the beginning, if possible, and you want to see them gradually making fewer and fewer mistakes so that when you launch them into the world, you feel pretty confident that they're going to be okay and they're going to manage their money well. Okay, I'm going to go through this slide and then if y'all have any questions, feel free to jump in. So 11 to 17, your tweens and teens, right? You might add a clothing allowance. We did this for our kids at about age 13, I think it was, give or take, and it was $50 a month back then, right? And it was clothing except for a winter coat and a pair of boots and maybe a swimsuit. I can't remember. Like sort of some very basic things that every kid should have. We said, we'll pay for those, but everything else. And, over time, they learned to thrift. They learned to shop at Target. They didn't develop a taste for Nordstrom. Some kids I'm hoping in the Butler atmosphere, not too many kids are developing a taste for Nordstrom from their peers, at least. But certainly kids in certain other school settings maybe feeling peer pressure around, buying high cost brand name items, etc. So these are the ages where, especially when the child is buying their own clothing, etc., or their own what we call lotions and potions, shampoos and skin creams and whatever. If that's where you can do sort of a shopper's ed type stuff with your child and sort of show them, what's a good deal. And you certainly want to be modeling this. I got a really good deal on this at Best Buy. I wanted this, and you can sort of talk them through it or show them. This is what I wanted. I waited until Black Friday. I did all my research. I waited until Black Friday when I thought the price would go down, and sure enough, it did. And so I got on early and I was able to buy the TV I wanted at Best Buy or whatever. Teach kids how you go about making your spending decisions, what you think is too expensive to spend on a TV and what you think is the right amount, etc. And those kind of values, how much should a t-shirt be? If you go to Bloomingdale's, a t-shirt's going to be $50. That's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard, when you can buy a t-shirt at Target for $8, right? And my kids know that because they know I'm a Target shopper. And so they've become Target shoppers because that's sort of our money, one of our money values, right? Is to, now, if we had a different value that I don't buy disposable clothing, nowadays, young people are talking about recycling clothing and a lot more thrifting is happening. And if that's their value around their stuff, if you will, the things they're going to buy, then I think that's a wonderful way for them to express it by saying, I'm not going to buy a cheap pair of jeans. I'm going to go to the thrift store. I'll spend even less and I'll be recycling the jeans. Great. Okay. So especially as kids get older, they're going to develop some of their own values around money, around stuff, around the value, what is a good value to them, etc. And you will need to support them in that. Again, even at this stage, you have to be really clear, because your kid will either forget or conveniently forget that they're supposed to pay for their haircut. And when they want you to pay for the haircut, you say, well, didn't you bring your money? You're the one who pays for haircuts, right? And so maybe you're not having a to-do in the haircut place, right? But when you get home, that's a mistake on their part. That's them not acting with integrity. And so it's almost like, an employee who puts in a personal expense as a business expense and asks their company to reimburse them for it, right? That's just stealing, right? So again, I would not use inflammatory language with your children, but that is what it is. And so you want your child to understand we have an agreement, right? So lots of struggles will happen. Your child might be a kind of kid who wants to try to get you to pay for stuff that they're really supposed to pay for. And you just really have to, in a very kind of firm and friendly way, that's PEP speak for those of you who've been through PEP classes, you're going to be firm and friendly and say, yeah, no, that's you, and you need to now reimburse me the $24 for the haircut that you got. Oh, you don't have enough money? Would you like me to garnish your allowance for the next, how should we handle this? It's a discussion, right? What you don't want it to become is a power struggle. You just want it to be, let's learn, let's figure it out. But you do have to stand your ground when you've set certain limits around this money. Okay. When they get to college, that's when the anxiety sometimes really ramps up, because now they have to actually manage money, whether they have a part-time job at school or you're giving them an allowance, which is essentially their income. And they also have to manage their healthcare, which is also anxiety provoking. So kids are in a tough spot as freshmen. And I remember both kids, and feeling overwhelmed by having to manage a lot of stuff, and that in that first semester, especially the money. And so we talked about, I think we were going to do like a multi-month thing where we'd give them like 3 months worth or a whole semester's worth of money, and then they had to manage it. That turned out to be too much. right? Too much money that then they had to worry about what if I run out, etc. They needed a shorter time period to manage that money over. So I believe it was a month, right? And then over time, most people actually do manage their money on a semi-monthly or a monthly basis because that's how we get paid in most situations. So making a child manage money, spending money, the day-to-day stuff over a longer period didn't make sense. That was a mistake we made. That we realized when the children came back with their reaction, we realized, oh, that was too long a period of time to ask a kid to manage their money over. So again, even in the college years, you're going to be learning and helping your child to learn what works best for themselves. And then, of course, when they get out of college and they get a job, or when they have, and maybe they don't go to college and they get a job, or they go to college, they come out, they get a part-time job because they can't find a full-time job in their area, whatever that is, you will either discontinue their allowance because they now make their own money and it's enough, or maybe you are supporting them. I know plenty of families where their child has an entry-level job in New York City, but they need a place to live. And so those parents may be subsidizing housing for a period of time as their child's career is starting to ramp up. So again, there's no sin in giving money to your children at all. In fact, it's a wonderful thing that you can do. But the way that you give it, the systems you have, the way you speak about it, the not fighting about it or having power struggles over it, all that makes the giving and receiving of the money into a much more positive and a good learning experience for your kids. Okay, let me stop there for a minute because I know, and then we can talk about if you have questions that you want to jump in with.
Someone in the chat wanted to know, at what age would you start teaching entrepreneurship?
Huh. Very interesting. I did not cover entrepreneurship. I kind of think that whenever a child is interested in entrepreneurship, they figured out a way that they could make money. I think that's the time, right? Now, some kids, I see kids in my neighborhood sometimes with, lemonade stands and whatnot. Often they learn that they put their lemonade stand in the wrong place, or because they don't get enough customers or something like that. So all those things are learning experiences. And even if your child is quite devastated by the fact that they only made one sale and it was to you all day long that they had their lemonade stand, I do think that you can support them, because I think that's a wonderful um, it's a wonderful attitude. I did not come out of an entrepreneurial family. I did start a company, but boy, I'm no natural entrepreneur. I had to kind of learn everything because I didn't have that drive in me. So I actually think you should nurture that drive as soon as possible. But a younger child is going to need more boundary setting, perhaps for safety reasons, maybe, depending on what it is that they want to do to make money. Let me also say that in our family, because we're about to get to the do's and don'ts. In our family, you could make more money from us, that the kids could make more money if they were willing to do jobs that were not their regular jobs, their regular chores. We had a whole chore system in our family, and they were not being paid for those chores. Allowance was not connected to those, and I'll come to that in the next slide. But if they wanted to go and pick up sticks around the backyard, we paid 5 cents a stick. If they wanted to mow the grass or, do any of those other things that either we would be doing or might be hiring somebody else to do, they were more than welcome. If they wanted to wash baseboards, I never had either of them take me up on that. I do not know why, but I offered it as a way for them to make more money to help spark their entrepreneurial interests. And I don't think it really did anything for that. So, because I don't have particularly entrepreneurial kids, but if you do, go for it, really support that. Okay, other questions? I see somebody has their
Yeah,
hand
Jesse, go
raised.
ahead.
Hi there. First of all, Leah, I'm a huge fan of yours. I'm also a daily money manager. And so when I
We love
found out
daily money management.
so when Emma had mentioned that, I was like, oh my gosh, so I really wanted to make this. So thank you so much for doing this. Um,
Absolutely.
but I really am, and I'm also on the pet board. So all
Oh,
of this stuff is
wow.
super, super
We got a
resonating
lot
with
to
me.
talk about. We need to get
Yeah,
coffee.
we should. But I actually was looking at both what had just been said, or what the question about entrepreneurial spirit, and I agree in that, so what I tried, and this also actually speaks to another question that just popped up in the chat about not being spirited about taking on certain things. Um, it really is about, I feel, knowing who your child really is and what drives them. And so, like during COVID, something that I tried with my daughters was I said, I want to pay you for things that bring you joy. Bring me a painting, bring me, a building that you're proud of, like really trying to attach the trying to attach more to, like, go, if you never if you love what you do, you're not working a day in your life, sort of a mentality. And
Absolutely.
what ended up happening was they started figuring out, well, if I only need $3, I can put together a really rough sketch and get my $3. But if I want my $9 or however much it was, then they put a lot of effort into whatever they brought me. And that I felt, and that was when they were in that like lower elementary sort of age group. It doesn't work now. I'm just going to be honest with people. It doesn't work now because they're older. But when we were just starting out, I thought that made a huge difference. And even though sometimes we don't always agree on certain things, I think that it did make a difference in terms of helping them understand that the value of the dollar is also the value of the effort they're putting in. So I just wanted to share that with the group, and if folks were struggling or wanted different ideas, so that I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I like that. That's really nice because a lot of people do dislike their jobs. They do them simply because they need to make a living, and being able to link, how I make money with how I get joy is a wonderful thing. So I like your idea. Um, are there any more questions before I move on, Em?
Well, I wanted to say something really quickly about entrepreneurship because it's kind of related. And then if people have questions, please just raise your hand or pop them in the chat. We're happy to answer them. But this is my shameless plug for the intermediate program, which is to say that we do so much entrepreneurship with the farm. And I just had the great experience this week alone, which is why this is happening in such a wonderful way, talking to a lot of the 8th and 9th year students who are now managers on the farm to say, okay, but how much money is the farm actually making us? And what they essentially figured out when we were doing all of the math is that we're losing, like, and we're talking about huge amounts of, well, huge, for them, but we're losing $2,500 on our chickens, it turns out, because they're not producing very many eggs right now. We're in this like weird transition point with the chickens. And they were like, oh my God, our chickens are losing us money. Well, as it turns out, our farm market is supposed to profit in this year $3,500. Okay, well, we're safe, right? We're going to end up in the black, which is awesome, but we're not making as much profit as maybe we could if we could monetize our chickens in another way that does not include killing them, because I'm a vegetarian and we are not a farm to table model. So they've been talking so much about, okay, they have this new idea, you will find out about it, called Adopt a Chicken. And what they want to do is they want to offer the opportunity for primary and elementary age kids to adopt one of our chickens. And they'll send you a monthly newsletter about their chicken, and they'll let you have a photo shoot with the chicken, and you get exclusive coupons for farm market. And I thought that that was a fabulous idea. And of course, the chickens continue to live with us. So you don't actually get to take them home with you, but you can have a whole wall of your house dedicated to pictures of your child with a chicken. But this was their idea. Is they're like, okay, well, our chickens have to make more money, but we still need to be able to pay for the things that they need, right? They need food, they need shelter, they need all these things. I just thought it was the most brilliant example of entrepreneurship. Oh my God, Bobby, a chicken kissing booth. Uh, I love it. But these lessons where we as guides are sort of guiding them through these big, very real questions of like, we have a farm, the farm is supposed to make money. How do we ensure that we are actually profiting on these things and we're not losing money? it's the first sort of like bigger entry point into entrepreneurship. And also they have to collaborate because it's not just one person setting up their lemonade booth. It's how do I work with all of my other managers to make sure that all the different aspects of the farm are working together to make money. So anyway, like I said, shameless plug for the intermediate program, but if you want your kids to know about entrepreneurship, there's no better place than the farm.
Right. I like that. Okay, let me go on because I have 2 pages of do's and don'ts, and I really would like to go over some of them. Okay, so when you start out, certainly when the kids are really small, and even when they're not small, but they haven't been having allowance until now, like you're going to put it in place when they're 12, keep the purposes of the allowance simple and limited at the beginning. Because if you tell a child, an older child in particular, who's just starting this for the first time, until now, they asked you for money, you gave them money, or didn't give them money. You want to keep it simple and limited. So maybe they are only responsible for a few things at the beginning. And as they get better at it, you add more things and maybe add more money to cover more things. And as best you can, clearly communicate what you expect them to pay for. And maybe you all write, doesn't have to be a contract, but maybe you make a list and it's stored somewhere, especially if you have family meetings. Maybe there's a place that you keep notes of your family meetings or something that you can memorialize in writing this agreement that you have about what they're going to spend their allowance on and what things you're going to spend on. The big one that parents really have a hard time with is the second one. Don't link allowance to chores. If you want to, you can, but I don't think it's a good idea. And this is why. First of all, people should do the job in a family because they're a member of the family. Nobody pays you to wash the dishes. Why would you pay your kids to wash the dishes? And what you will find if you do link allowances to chores is that your child hates the chore more than they like the money. So over time, what will happen is they'll say, I don't care if I don't get my allowance. I just don't want to do that chore, especially as they get older. So once you've linked it, it's hard to de-link. And I really think that kids need to know that when you're in a family, a community, there are privileges and responsibilities. And so one of the privileges is not allowance. Allowance is their income. That's something different. That's them sharing in the spoils of your family, right? You're giving them a little bit of the profit you get because you work, right? And then you're letting them use it to learn what they need to learn about money. But if you want to punish them for not living up to their responsibilities, then take away a privilege, watching TV or, whatever other privileges, if you're going to do that type of thing. So I just wanted to say that linking allowances with chores usually backfires. Also paying them, saying, paying them for, in order to elicit any behavior. What Jessie said, notwithstanding, I understand what she was doing there, but generally paying children to study, paying children to, etc. For some kids, it might work. And I think there's lots of people who have tried that. Again, I personally don't think it's a great idea, and I wouldn't go there unless I really had to for some reason. I think that kids should study because it's important for them to study, and if they're not doing that, then there's a whole bunch of other underlying reasons, and paying them to do things that they should be doing just because they're intrinsically motivated. The one thing you really don't want to do with your allowance is to make it into an extrinsic motivator for all sorts of things for which you are trying to teach them to be intrinsically motivated. Okay. Do obviously start small. I think I've covered this, and just sort of increase with age and the amount of responsibility that they have in the household and their abilities, of course. I think I just said, don't use allowance to force good behavior, so you can't say, if you don't stop hitting your sister, I'm going to take away your allowance. Don't take away their allowance. Give them their allowance because it's something separate from behavior problems, etc. Do be dependable. We found it difficult, to be honest. We were operating in cash. We were operating, the parents, in plastic. I mean, this is already, 20 plus years ago, but we're operating in plastic, but we had to operate in cash for the kids for their allowance. And inevitably, we were not prepared. You know, I finally took to getting a whole bunch of those little envelopes and going to the bank and getting a whole bunch of small bills and like filling up the envelopes ahead of time so that when allowance day came, I would actually have the cash. So whatever system you're using, figure out a way that you can be consistent with it. And certainly if you're in an automated system where you are automatically taking money from your account electronically and putting it into your child's Venmo account, let's just say, or some reloadable debit card, then automate that so that you don't even have to remember to do it. So because your kid, because remember, hopefully you're not going to take it away for bad behavior or anything like that. So they get their income every week or every month, as promised. I've already talked, I think, a little, maybe I didn't talk about this, but I did, about cash and how for little kids in particular, you'd still want to operate in cash. Okay. For the older kids, you really do want to teach them about managing money electronically. My favorite pet peeve of the younger set is that they don't manage passwords particularly well. They don't use long enough passwords, complicated enough passwords, and they reuse them, etc. Please, read up on password management, use longer passwords like 12 characters or more, a little bit more complicated. Please don't use their birth dates in them and those kinds of things. Teach them about staying safe on the internet around their money, right? And then teach them how credit cards work, right? Sit them down with a credit card statement and show them that box that says, if your child is old enough to be having a credit card, maybe they're 17 or 18, about to go to college, and they get a credit card, right? And it's supposed to be for emergencies, but maybe sometimes they may use it, even though it's supposed to be for emergency, they used it and now they have to pay it. They need to know how to go about doing that, right? So you want to try to, with the younger kids, keep it as simple as possible. As the kids get older and as we, moved into, our adult lives, things did get more complicated. Lucky for us in this day and age, we can automate so many things that you can sort of set it and forget it. One more pet peeve: older kids do not check their statements. They don't look and make sure that nobody has hacked in or is taking out money, or they signed up for Hulu and they don't want Hulu anymore, but the $8.99 is being taken out of their account 3 months still since the time they thought they canceled Hulu, right? This happens to adults, and it certainly happens to young adults who have the control over their money such that the Hulu subscription is theirs, right? Okay. Don't micromanage their money. So this is where technology can either be your friend and your child's friend or not, because with the reloadable debit cards, especially the ones that are designed for parents to be able to monitor what their children are doing, you will need to make some choices about monitoring. How much visibility how much are you going to check? What are you going to check? I think you should be checking a 10-year-old's transactions if they're using a debit card. Maybe you should be checking a 12 or 13-year-old's. It's sort of along the lines of, do you read your children's texts? Some parents do, some parents don't. Some parents didn't until the bad thing happened, and now they are, right? These are all conversations that you would be wanting to have with your older child, and let them know you're watching. If you're going to be watching everything that they spend their money on, then let them know for sure that you're watching. But if you see that they've spent something that's not dangerous, let's say, or illegal, it's just a big old waste of money, please try to keep your mouth completely shut over that, because they will figure out that they spent money where they could have used it for something that they actually want more. Let them learn the lessons. And then when they get to be around 17, I'd say 18 for sure, maybe 16 even, depending on your child, please stop monitoring them. Let them, again, some kids maybe still need monitoring. We know there's lots of kids who get into these older ages who aren't ready really to jump into adulting. So again, you have to know your child. But in general, you really want to let them have their privacy around how they're spending the money that they make or the money that you give them as allowance. Okay. So I think that's really important for parents to not be sort of hovering and micromanaging the spending. If your kid gets into a pickle, maybe they borrowed money from a friend because they didn't have enough and now they need to pay back. You know, then you can talk about, how did you get into the pickle, you know? And if hopefully they didn't borrow money from the mob and you have to help them out by paying the money back so they don't get killed. I get that. Absolutely. If your kid gets into a situation where, or maybe they spent too much money on the credit card and now they're going to incur interest. You have to decide whether you're going to bail them out. And if you are going to bail them out, you know, what is the discussion going to be around that? I really don't recommend bailing out in general, unless it's something that's really going to harm them in the future. But in general, let them pay interest, you know, let them pay 24.99% interest. Trust me, that will hurt enough that they will not want that, you know, to continue to happen. I maxed out my very first credit card. I had a pretty good paying job. And it was a $2,500 limit, and I learned my lesson. You know, it took me a while to pay that back. I paid interest, but my parents didn't even know, right? Parents didn't have the ability to be as involved. They couldn't get in helicopters back then very much. And now parents get in helicopters all the time and buzz around their kids. And, you know, if you know that about yourself, that's your tendency, you know, try to just know that the money lessons will be better learned if you let them happen as a matter of natural consequences. Okay, we've reached 8 o'clock. I want to just 2 more slides that I just want to tell you are here, because then I'm going to email this presentation to Emma and she can email it to all of you guys. So there's a bunch of apps out there. I haven't used any of these. The Economist gave me many of these names, an interesting article that wasn't too long ago. And Greenlight is the one that one of the Butler parents mentioned. There are more out there. So, you know, I'd say share information with each other, you know, about who's using apps and how they're working. And then the last bit, a whole bunch of resources, some books for adults, for kids, a whole bunch of websites that are good for, you know, either games. There's a lot of gamification to teach kids about to give kids financial literacy, etc. So feel free to use those resources. And then at the end, I'm happy to be a resource for you. So if you want to ask more questions, if you just want to call me up or have a Zoom call with me and tell me what you're doing and see what I think about it. I'm no expert exactly, but I have a lot of ideas, especially having been a PEP leader. I have a lot of ideas for things, and maybe I'll give you an idea that will work for you, you know, so feel free to call me. And I'm happy to, you know, spend time with you on the phone or on Zoom. I gave you my calendar down there. So if you want to just get on my calendar, you can do that. Just let me know that you're a Butler parent and you're not like somebody trying to get services for everyday money management, because I gave you my work email because I look at that more often. So thank you for your attention, and I really hope Allowance goes well. I'm happy to stay on and answer more questions now, or you can contact me, you know, afterwards.
No questions. Thank you very much. This has been really informative.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Like there's questions. Great.
Yeah.
Just us.